Capitol controversy. Washington, D.C. considers allowing physician-assisted suicide. Healthcare options. Donald Trump pledges to replace Obamacare if he's elected president. One more week. Former presidential candidate Rick Santorum talks with Lauren Ashburn about the final campaign stretch. And celebrating All Saints' Day Mass. Pope Francis shares the Holy Day with Sweden's tiny but growing Catholic community. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, November 1st, 2016. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick, and the D.C. Council votes for a controversial bill to legalize assisted suicide. Opponents who see this vote as a setback plan to take their case to Congress. Wyatt Goolsby covered today's vote. Wyatt?
Brian, today's vote in the D.C. Council came down 11-2. Ultimately, members voted in favor of the so-called Death with Dignity Act. The voting happened late this afternoon as those for and against the bill packed into the chamber. Members of the group No DC Suicide disagree with the decision, but they say the fight is far from over. The bill does not become law until the council votes in favor of it twice, and even then, Congress has the final say over all D.C. laws. The so-called Right to Die bill advanced in a narrow committee in October. The bill would allow patients with 6 months or less to live to request lethal medication from their doctors. Many of those against the bill include the elderly, the poor, and the disabled. Longtime Washington, D.C. resident Leona Redmond says it targets African Americans as well.
The people that it's really aimed at are people like me. Poor black people rely substantially on government for medical services, and why not pay $300 for a pill to kill me at once as opposed to paying $350 a month to keep me healthy.
Several council members denied that claim during today's meeting, saying the final decision on life and death should be left up to the patient and his or her family, and that this bill has strict rules about who can get lethal medication. But opponents say the bill is one step closer to legalize euthanasia. During today's council meeting, several members cited the states which have physician-assisted suicide laws already in place. That includes states like California, Oregon, Washington, Vermont, and Montana. The second and the final vote on this issue on the D.C. Council will happen in 2 weeks from today on November 15th. Brian?
Wyatt, is there anything our viewers can do to help defeat this bill?
Well, certainly several of the groups who are fighting this bill say anyone can help. Any American members of the public can participate. First, it just starts with participation in the conversation. They say they're active on social media, for example, so you can always tweet at the D.C. Council themselves. That the handle there is at Council of D.C. You can also join the wider conversation with the hashtag Wrong4DC. That's the number 4, Wrong4DC. And of course, any member of the public can call the mayor of Washington, D.C., Mayor Muriel Bowser, in her office at 202-727-2643 and ask her to veto the bill. Even one member of her health department has voiced their concern about this bill as well. Brian?
Thank you, Wyatt Goolsby. And we discussed today's vote with the Executive Director of Euthanasia Prevention Coalition USA a little bit later on. And just a week away from the presidential election, the Catholic vote could tip the scales. Jason Calvi reports tonight on the last-minute push to secure these swing voters. Jason?
Brian, look at the Catholic numbers. Some of the major swing states. Pew finds 24% of Pennsylvanians are Catholic. In Florida, that number's 21%, and 18% of Ohioans. Tonight, the fight is on to get these voters.
The Trump campaign is sharing these flyers with swing state Catholics. It lists the two nominees' positions on life, religious liberty, the Supreme Court, and school choice. Something Donald Trump spoke of today in the battleground state of Pennsylvania.
They can send their kids to public school, to private, to charter, to magnet, to religious, or to homeschool. It's going to be their right.
Trump and Governor Mike Pence both slammed Obamacare as premiums rise.
We're going to pull it off the market so it stops burning up our wallets.
In Pennsylvania, some healthcare premiums are expected to rise by 40%.
I will ask Congress to convene a special session so we can repeal and replace. And it will be such an honor for me, for you, and for everybody in this country.
The Constitution gives the power to the president to convene Congress in extraordinary occasions. While in battleground Florida, Hillary Clinton bashes Trump.
And I learned it in Sunday school. You know, it's not okay to insult people. It's not okay. And look at what he does. He calls women ugly.
She's backing that message up with these ads.
Putting a wife to work is a very dangerous thing.
This comes as a lay group of Catholics called Catholic Vote is spending $500,000 on these ads targeting voters in swing states.
But then with the Clinton campaign mocking us as Catholics, I'm back in.
Paid for by CatholicVote.org.
One of the most controversial parts of Obamacare is the contraceptive mandate. The Beckett Fund reports that 37 universities, 40 religious charities, including EWTN, and 15 dioceses have all sued, saying the mandate forces them to violate their faith. Brian?
Jason Calvi, thank you. Former presidential candidate Rick Santorum, a Catholic, now supports the Trump campaign. He joins our Lauren Ashburn at the White House tonight. Lauren?
Brian, thank you so much. Senator, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate it. We just heard Hillary Clinton say that she learned in Sunday school that you are not supposed to make fun of people. You, as a devout Catholic, also know those same lessons. When it comes to Donald Trump and your support of him, how do you separate the person from the policy?
Well, Hillary Clinton advocates for policies that are evil. The destruction of human life. That's objectively evil. The Catholic Church teaches that. There's no, the destruction of human life through abortion is evil. The destruction of the family that she has advocated for
late-term abortions.
Late-term abortion.
About. Euthanasia.
Euthanasia, assisted suicide. All of these things are objective evil. And we know that she supports those things. What Donald Trump does is bad behavior. No question about it.
How
horrible.
bad? Okay.
We would say in the Catholic, we'd say sinful behavior. But he is not advocating for evil policies. He is not trying to bring evil and say we need to propagate these types of, and he's not saying, by the way, do what I do.
Right.
He's not saying, I did bad things and you should do those bad things too.
Right.
She is. She's saying, I am for these horrible things, and we need to make everybody else
in the
live by
entire
those
country do that,
That's
including
right.
with religious liberty,
Yes.
including same-sex marriage. You know, you worked with Hillary for 6 years on Capitol Hill. You were both senators at the same time, from 2000 to 2006.
When she was First Lady.
So how was your relationship there? She always says that she was very bipartisan.
No, she wasn't. In fact, I wrote a book back in 2005 called It Takes a Family. And
Not
I wrote
It Takes a Village, which
right.
is what Hillary Clinton
Clinton wrote. I wrote it in
wrote.
response to her book, It Takes a Village. And there are very clear differences. Hillary, I think, frankly, if you get back to the issue of character, her character is equally noxious, and maybe in more so. I mean, she's deceitful, she's secretive. Look at the way, you want to talk about treating women, look at the way she treated women who came into that White House and was with her husband. I mean, there are all sorts of issues that we can talk about character. But when it came to the issues, Hillary Clinton was as doctrinaire a liberal as anybody. I'll give you one example when he was president. When Bill Clinton was president, we worked very closely with his team to eventually get a welfare reform bill signed. It was vetoed twice. There was one person in the White House who was adamantly against that bill ever being signed, and that was Hillary Clinton. And in fact, all of Hillary Clinton's people in the administration, or many of them, resigned after Bill signed that bill. So if you want to look at who the doctrinaire, tough, progressive is in the Clinton family, it was Hillary Clinton when she was First Lady, and she kept those policies up when she was in the
Let's
Senate.
talk about Obamacare, because she had a failed attempt at at health care.
Exactly.
And
Hillary
now we're looking at increased prices in 2017, 25%, and in your home state,
almost 50%.
Almost 50%.
Yeah.
And Donald Trump says, and said today in Pennsylvania, that he is going to repeal Obamacare. Is that something that you think should sway voters?
Absolutely. And, you know, it upsets me a little bit that people talk about premium increases. And they've been huge. I mean, 25% on average, almost 50% in the state of Pennsylvania. What they haven't talked about is deductible increases, the out-of-pocket expenses that you have to pay before your insurance even kicks in. So those have gone up even more dramatically than premiums. Now, you can say that's a good or a bad thing, but the point is the out-of-pocket cost, even for those people that Obama says, well, yeah, and Hillary says, yeah, right, premiums are going up, but we're subsidizing those premiums. They're not subsidizing the deductibles.
And
the out-of-pocket cost is kicking people in the tail right now.
I think people at home watching would say, you ran for this office right here, and here you are standing with me.
This is as close as I got.
So. Well, we could wave, yeah, right? The question is, would you ever run again? And would you?
No, I mean, that's
no, you're done.
Yeah, I think, twice, you give it a good shot a couple of times, third time, you have to have maybe have to go and have a psychological examination.
Right. Okay. Senator Rick Santorum joining us here at the White House. Brian, back to you.
All right, Lauren Ashburn with Senator Santorum. Thank you, Lauren. Coming up, wrapping up his visit to Sweden, Pope Francis pushes for Christian unity. And see the damage left behind as more tremors rattle central Italy. Thanks for joining us on the Solemnity of All Saints. I'm Brian Patrick, and Pope Francis urges Sweden's tiny Catholic community to set aside divisions with Lutherans. He joined Lutheran leaders commemorating the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation. The Holy Father celebrating Mass for All Saints' Day this morning in Malmö, Sweden. The sports stadium there was packed with Nordic Catholics as well as immigrants, mainly from the Philippines. Francis proposes a new set of Beatitudes for all Christians today. He says we are called to be blessed to confront the troubles and anxiety of our age. Pope Francis again rules out women's ordination, saying the last word on the question was delivered by St. John Paul II. A journalist questioned the Holy Father as he was en route home from Sweden, where the Lutheran Church is headed by a woman. Ed Penton, our Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register, joining us by Skype from Rome. Ed, you traveled with the Holy Father. What can you tell us about Sweden's Catholics? How many are there? Are they converts, immigrants, what?
Yeah, they're almost all immigrants, Brian. They're I think, something like 80% of the Catholics in Sweden are immigrants. The community was actually wiped out after the Reformation, and they've taken centuries to get back. And now they're the fastest growing Christian community in Sweden because all the other churches are declining. So it's a very vibrant community, but as I said, they're almost all immigrants. But the bishop is the first actually native Swedish bishop since the Reformation. So things are going pretty well for the church there.
That is significant. So how did Swedes overall react to the Holy Father's trip, given their deeply secular society, their Lutheran roots?
I think they generally welcomed him pretty warmly. There was a very small protest when we arrived, but on the whole, I think they were very happy and excited to see him. There was I spoke to one non-Catholic coming out of the event yesterday. He was very pleased with it. I spoke to a Lutheran who was very happy with it and felt actually changed by his visit personally. So I think they were generally very happy with him, and I think they got a lot from his visit over the last couple of days.
Now, on the trip back to Rome, the question came up for the Holy Father about the possibility of women ordination. How did he respond?
Well, basically with a straight no, Brian. I think he referred to the declaration that John Paul II made in the mid-90s, which really was designed to put an end to the debate. And he referred to the questioner who asked him with a follow-up question. She said, "Is it never?" And he said, "Well, just consult the declaration that John Paul II gave." So it was a pretty firm no, yes.
So at today's Mass, he added his own prayers to the Beatitudes from Matthew's Gospel. What tone is he taking, and which is his favorite from the Sermon on the Mount?
Yes, well, his tone is very much, he's very keen on the Beatitudes, and I think he talks about them a lot in this homily. It's the center point of his homily because he sees it as the pathway, the identity of being a Christian, is to have, to put the Beatitudes at the center of one's life. And the one that the favorite of his is meekness, and he says that meekness, because it's a way of living and acting that draws us close to Jesus and to one another, he's very attracted by that, and he feels that other Christians and Catholics should really emulate Christ and be as meek as they can. But these are 6 new ones, which I think he feels are needed to better confront the problems of the world today. And I think that's the underpinning of why he's done that and said this today on All Saints' Day.
The National Catholic Register's Ed Penton joining us by Skype from Rome. Thank you, Ed.
Thanks, Brian.
And central Italy gets no respite from aftershocks, haunting a region where thousands are now homeless and frightened. As Italy observes All Saints' Day, a national holiday there, tremors in the central mountains come at a rate of several per hour. The strongest aftershock, a magnitude 4.7, hit this morning. Italian families traditionally visit the graves of loved ones tomorrow for All Souls' Day. Sadly, some cemeteries are heavily damaged in the stricken mountain villages, with coffins spilling out of their crypts. An Iraqi general says Iraq's special forces entered the outskirts of Mosul today. They're advancing despite fierce resistance by ISIS fighters who continue to hold that city. It is the first time in more than 2 years government troops have entered Iraq's second largest city. The advance could be the start of a grueling and slow operation for these troops. They will be forced to engage in difficult house-to-house fighting in urban areas that could take months. The Iraqi general says bombs have been laid along the road into the city. 6 people were killed, 10 hurt when a school bus collided with a commuter bus in Baltimore this morning. National Transportation Safety Board officials have joined the investigation tonight. Witnesses say the school bus veered into oncoming traffic after hitting the back of a truck. There were no children on the school bus. The driver was among those killed. We reported earlier that the D.C. Council voted today to legalize assisted suicide here in the District of Columbia. It's the first of 2 votes. Catherine Glenn Foster, Executive Director of Euthanasia Prevention Coalition USA, is joining us. How significant is today's vote, and what is your strategy now?
It is significant. It is the first of 2 votes with the council. Then, of course, after that, the bill will go to the mayor, who can veto it, sign it, or do nothing with it, in which case it does move forward, and then it goes to Congress. If Congress acted, it would go to the president, so there are a number of steps that could be taken that would stop it. However, given the vote today, 11 to 2, it doesn't look very promising within the council. So our strategy at this point is to continue to put pressure to bring out the citizens, the actual people who would be hurt by this legislation.
Who is advocating for this, and who are the most vocal voices against it?
You know, the people who are advocating for it often have a personal story related to it, and many of those stories may be tragic. You know, we have come so far in the last years in terms of pain management and end-of-life care and all of these things that are just helping people have a more peaceful end of life. And, you know, we aren't perfect yet. We have, you know, a ways to go as we work towards that, but they have often a personal story. But they're taking that and saying that better than living out someone's last days, it would be best to just cut that off. Jumping into the abyss, you could call it.
I saw the Little Sisters of the Poor at the hearing. They're an example of how to have a beautiful transition from this life to the next.
Exactly.
We're pro-life people. How can we fight back here?
Live. You know, there are so many things we can do by just continuing to live, continuing to build stories, being vocal about the abuses of laws like this, and also being vocal about our decisions to live through our natural deaths. That will make a huge difference. And then, of course, reaching out to the city council, to the mayor, to friends and neighbors, and just anyone. I met so many wonderful people at today's hearing, and I've gotten to know so many people over the last few months. It's been just amazing to form these coalitions with people that I hadn't met before and who are maybe new to the pro-life movement, but are so valuable.
Very briefly, where does the medical community stand on this?
It is, for the most part, against assisted suicide. You know, there are studies that show that while in some countries most doctors support it, they aren't willing to participate in it. There is some danger of medical communities going neutral. We've had a discussion about that here in DC and even the AMA, and that is a huge danger because the doctors are incredibly at risk here. Their conscience rights, you know, you see the Vermont case where their conscience rights are at risk.
And there are others as well. From Euthanasia Prevention Coalition USA, Catherine Glenn Foster, thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, Catholics weigh their choices for president, how we can help restore the political process. And survival story. Emergency crews find a hiker lost in the jungle. On this holy day, the Feast of All Saints, thanks for joining us. The 1st of November, I'm Brian Patrick. Emergency crews find a missing hiker who disappeared in a Malaysian jungle. A local fire chief says Andrew Gaskell hadn't eaten in about 10 days and is very weak. The Australian man is hospitalized now for treatment. Dozens of searchers had been looking for Gaskell for 6 days since his family lost contact with him. A quarter of all voters say abortion is extremely important to their choice for president. That according to last week's Politico poll. 58% of voters favor continued federal funding of Planned Parenthood, but also 58% oppose allowing Medicaid funding to be used for abortion. With only a week before Election Day, many voters still don't like the choices they face. Catherine Jean Lopez, editor-at-large at the National Review, writes, Hillary Clinton's stubborn extremism on abortion is astonishing. Yes, she's a liberal ideologue who has been advocating abortion internationally for decades. Catherine Jean Lopez joining us tonight, and we're talking about the heat that you're taking from even some pro-lifers because you say you're not voting for Trump. What's your defense?
Well, I think if you look at the reality of the election and the way Republicans are looking across the board, the one thing that so many people are holding on to in their decision to vote for Trump, and believe me, I think everybody has freedom to make the decision with their conscience prudently about what they have to do. I'm not judging anybody based on whether or not they're voting for Trump, but the fact of the matter is a lot of people are holding on to Supreme Court nominations, and goodness knows I know they're important. But Donald Trump's probably not going to have the numbers in the Senate to be able to follow through on some of the promises he's made. I think that this election, as terrible as it is, with two choices, frankly, that I think are terrible, I think this is a moment for Catholics to say, all right, enough. We've been complicit in the political situation as it is, the instability, and the lack of, frankly, Catholics trying to take Catholic public social teaching seriously in the public square. Let's do something differently, and let's try to forge ahead. With Pope Francis talked when he came to Congress about our need to be hope and healing in the country. Well, maybe that's exactly what the country needs right now, and what happens beyond Election Day is even more important than what happens on Election Day.
But something has to change. Can Catholics lead a renewal of our political process, and how?
I think we have to. And of course, the most important thing that you do in your civic life isn't necessarily voting on presidential election day every 4 years. That's super important. But I think because we haven't taken the rest of it seriously, the local level stuff, the constant involvement, and the prayer, frankly, too, I think we're seeing the fruits of that, or the poisoned fruits of that. We got to go back to basics here. I mean, obviously we have a catechetical problem. We have all these layers of problems. Get to the catechesis, the education, and when Pope Francis came here, he talked. The theme was "Love is our mission," and he went when he was here in Washington D.C. to the Little Sisters of the Poor, which was an affirmation of religious freedom, and they're fighting for religious freedom, but it was also, look, this is the church. These women who serve selflessly with love, making people see that the Catholic Church isn't just bishops saying no on the so-called pelvic issues, as they've been called, or weighing in on political battles. When they see the whole church and the fact that we need not just the church, but the beacons of civil society across the board of the faith traditions, then I think our contributions make more of a difference and are more credible to people. And I think politics looks different if we take that stuff seriously.
If we could all live like the Little Sisters of the Poor, there we'd have it.
Amen.
Catherine Jean Lopez, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Brian.
And finally tonight, the World Series could be decided in Cleveland. The Indians hope to win the series in front of their home crowd. It would be their first championship since 1920. If the Cubs win tonight, it would force the series and Game 7 and the Cubs would have a chance to win for the first time since, I think it was 1908. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night. God bless you.